All right. Hello again, adventures, and welcome to another exciting episode of D&Done, your guide to one D&D. So, for anyone that's been paying attention, they have released a new playtest packet, which I actually find kind of interesting because they released a playtest packet in August. In September, they had the feedback that went all the way up until the to 26th, so just 3 days ago, and then today they released. On the 29th, they released the next playtest packet, and I actually wasn't expecting anything until October. Now, we are only a couple days away from October anyway, but I was kind of impressed just with how fast this came out. Overall, the playtest packet itself is called Expert Classes. And when I first read that, I thought that they were trying to bring back the idea of advanced classes that have existed. In third edition, you had, I can't remember what they were called, Epic class or something like that. Anyway, you had like advanced classes that you could multi-class into. In fourth edition, that was kind of taken over by Paragon Paths and Epic Destinies, but those were kind of like advanced classes. And then even if you go back to original D&D and advanced Dungeons and Dragons first edition, they actually did have things like, if I remember correctly, the Bard was technically an advanced class because you had to take some levels in Rogue, and then you also had to take some classes in, I think, Wizard. So the idea of advanced classes is not something that is alien to D&D in general, and they did do an Unearthed Arcana years ago where they tried to create some advanced classes that just didn't work at all with 5th edition, because 5th edition is just built differently. However, I was 100% wrong. So this particular video is just going to be kind of my overview opinion of the whole thing. I'm going to break it down like I have the other ones. And this one I'm actually going to break it down per class because they show us 3 classes in here with one subclass piece. So my next few videos are going to be a little bit closer to my old kind of D&D, not old, my D&D deep dive style videos where I dive deep into a class or a subclass. So that being said, let's talk about some of the kind of big overarching changes. The first large change. They are bringing back rolls, folks. If anybody has no clue what in the world roll is referring to, so in the edition that shall not be named, otherwise called D&D 4th edition, otherwise my favorite version of D&D, not that I don't like 5th edition, I run 2 5th edition games, I run 0 4th edition games. So yeah, I do love 5th edition, I think it's great, but there's just something special about 4th edition. So, back in 4th edition, there were 4 roles. And this was something that people that didn't like D&D 4th edition used to kind of justify their hatred of it. It wasn't true, but a lot of people said that the roles were basically mimicking an MMORPG where you have the... they call it the Holy Trinity in MMORPGs. You have tanks, you have DPS, you have healers. In 4th edition, there's actually 4 roles, which the 4th role can sometimes show up in MMOs. EverQuest actually had an entire kind of group of classes that weren't officially called this, but players tend to refer to them as CC, which is called crowd control. So the fourth role kind of fit into that. So it was an easy kind of jump to make to say, yes, this is just, they're mimicking an MMO. They weren't. Roles have existed technically since 2nd edition, long before any MMOs existed, because 2nd edition you had warrior, mage, cleric, and thief, I think, and then the various there was only technically 4 kind of classes, and then every other class underneath it was grouped into one of these 4 sections. So it's not like it's a new concept even for 4th edition. But it was a really helpful tool for you to understand that, okay, if I choose the 4 roles were defender, leader, striker, and controller. And it was significantly easier for you to understand how the class was designed by just going, oh, this is a defender, so this class is going to be designed a little bit more around taking hits. They're generally going to either have a higher armor class or just some way that they can justify taking some more hits. And that's the entire point of a defender. A striker is going to be designed to do more damage. A leader is going to have some sort of ability, generally as a minor action, to heal their allies and help keep them alive in some way, shape, or form. And then controllers literally did that. They could control the battlefield. They were super fun to play. So they're bringing back roles, but they're doing it kind of differently. Instead of calling them roles, they are now class groups. Which again harkens back to kind of the D&D 2nd edition thing, where you basically had 4 groups of classes. And again, if I remember correctly, they were warriors, mages, clerics, or priests maybe, and then thieves. And things like the bard was underneath the thief role or class group or whatever it was. And like the barbarian and the fighter and I think the ranger as well were all underneath the warrior class group and things like that. So the class groups that they have now are a little bit different. They have experts, which are the 3 classes that we're dealing with today, or this playtest packet, mages, priests, and warriors. And each one has what are called characteristics, which I find really interesting. Again, the entire purpose of 4th edition roles was to give you a little bit more guidance when you were building your class as to what you can expect the class to do. And one of the unique things about the roles is, in general, when you would read a class description, it would say role defender. It would give a brief description of how it works as a defender. And then it would go, depending on how you build this class, it can specialize into either a striker or a leader or something like that, or a striker and a controller. So it would always give you a thing of, by the way, this also has these functions. So you could have defenders that kind of sub-rolled into striker, that the way they defended was they did a lot of damage. Or strikers that kind of sub-rolled into leaders, where, yes, they did lots of damage, but they also could give buffs or help out their allies as well. So it was a pretty interesting thing. The class groups for 1 D&D seem to be based on a single feature that is the same in all classes under that class group. For experts, they all have the expertise feature. Now, if you've watched D&D Deep Dive, we've talked about expertise. Expertise is technically a defining feature of the rogue, which, if you're unfamiliar with the term defining feature in 5th edition is anything that either is unique to the class or it's something that other classes get, but that particular class gets it earlier or can use it in different ways than any other class. And in order for something to be a defining feature, it has to show up within the first 2 levels. For rogues, they got their expertise, I believe, at level 2, if I remember correctly. I might be remembering this wrong, so I'm actually going to look it up before I sound like an idiot. Because I did just look up bards. Oh no, rogues get it at 6th level, never mind. And then bards got it at 3rd. So yeah, technically expertise wasn't a quote-unquote defining feature for either of them, but bards got it earlier because it shows up at 3rd level for bards instead of 2nd level. So it didn't technically count as a defining feature. But expertise tended to be something that was that tended to be associated with bards previously, because bards were kind of meant to be skill hounds and being able to do a lot of different kind of non-combat style things. So anyway, now all members of the expert class group get the expertise feature, and I believe they all get it at second level. I'm going to check real quick here before I say the wrong thing. No, some of them get it at first level. Rangers get it at first level, and I'll see rogues here real quick. And rogues get it at first level. So that's another thing I find really, really interesting is, again, in current 5th edition, both rogues and bards get expertise, but rogues get it later. They get it at 6th level. And then rangers don't technically get expertise in the PHB, but if you use the optional class features for the ranger in Tasha's, they do get a version of expertise as well. So turning all of them into a group called experts, because they all have the expertise feature, is interesting. And I find it even more interesting that the bard is the one that gets it the latest, because they don't get their expertise until 2nd level. But I think a lot of it has to do with the fact that the bard is a full caster, so at 1st level they get their defining feature, which is still their inspiration, but it's very, very different. We'll talk about that when I go through the classes individually. Whereas the ranger gets spellcasting at 2nd level, and the rogue doesn't get any spellcasting, but they get their sneak attack at 1st level. So it might just be that bards already had too many things at 1st level, that they waited until 2nd level to get them the expertise, just so you didn't get 7 things all at once, and then nothing for your 2nd level. So yeah, the experts, which they also do put a thing that they don't have the artificer in here, but the artificer also fits under the experts class group, which I find really interesting, because most people consider the artificer a subclass of wizard, not related to rogues and bards and the things like that. So that is kind of an interesting thing. We don't have a look at what the 1D&D artificer might look like right now. We just have the bard, rogue, and ranger. But yeah, so those are experts. Mages basically all use spells from the arcane spell list, which I find really interesting, because the bard also uses spells from the arcane spell list. So already, by using these class groups and defining them specifically by one feature, they're doing something weird. Again, I liked the roles from 4E, because they gave you an idea of kind of what you were going to be doing and kind of where you would fit in the party, which, by the way, that has always been a thing in 5th edition. There's a song that a lot of people know that has been around for years. I'm actually going to see if I can find it and see. Yeah, I think this is the actual one. Yeah, so the song is called "Never Split the Party" by Emerald Rose, and the YouTube video for it came out in 2007. So this was kind of common knowledge, 15 years ago. This was common knowledge. I'm trying to remember. If I'd done my research for this. Yeah, so 4th edition was officially announced at Gen Con 2007, but it didn't launch, I think, until 2008. So this predates 4th edition. So the idea that, their roles... So anything... The song itself goes, "Don't you know you never split the party? Fighters out in front to keep the party hardy." So everybody knew that certain classes had certain roles that they filled. The fact that they finally acknowledged it in D&D was not that big a deal. And again, the people that made it a big deal, they didn't actually care about that. They just hated that 4th edition existed, and so they would just literally look for any reason they could to shit on it. And that's what it was. So anyway, those are the experts. The mages, again, use arcane magic. Priests are even weirder. Specifically mages. Adapts of arcane magic focusing on utility and destruction is what the characteristics of mages are. Priests are stewards of divine or primal magic, focusing on healing, utility, and defense. So theoretically, mages are sorcerer, warlock, wizard. Priests are cleric, druid, and paladin, which I found kind of interesting. Which I'm starting to think, because again, priests, they say, stewards of divine or primal magic, focusing on healing, utility, and defense. I'm wondering if clerics are going to be kind of shoehorned a little bit more into filling that healer role. Druids are going to be shoehorned a little bit more into filling that kind of controller role for utility. And then paladins have always been a defensive class. Like, they always have been. And even in 5th edition, even if you build the most kind of striker style paladin, like a vengeance or a conquest paladin or anything like that, you still have a lot of features in the base class that are meant to provide defense for you and your allies. And then warriors is the final class group, and that's barbarian, fighter, and monk. And this is where I start to cry a little bit, because again, the monk is a fantastic class in 5th edition, and it gets shit on a lot by people. I tend to group these people into what I call 3rd edition purists, or Pathfinder players. And the reason I call them that is because not all of these people, most people that think this way think that 3rd edition was by far the best edition of D&D. Spoiler alert, it wasn't by a huge, huge long shot. And the reason that Pathfinder exists is entirely because of 3rd edition. And the reason that D&D took a dip is entirely because of is not entirely, but is partially because of 3rd edition killing basically the new player base. It was so massively complicated and so difficult to learn that new players stopped getting into D&D, and then 4th edition made it significantly easier for new players to get in, and all the 3rd edition purists shat and attacked D&D 4th edition and caused it to be significantly less successful than it could have been. It was still the best-selling RPG for almost the entire time they were putting books out. So it wasn't a failure, it just could have been a lot more. So anyway, the reason that I call these people 3rd edition purists is because they look entirely at numbers, and they completely ignore the fact that the entire purpose of a role-playing game is the fact that you don't have to focus entirely on the numbers. Being creative and using abilities creatively can be significantly more advantageous to the party than just whichever person rolls the highest. And if you just base the monk on numbers, specifically damage numbers, they suck. They can't keep up with really any class as far as damage dealing, because they're not built for that. They're a controller class. They're the only controller class in 5th edition. So grouping monks into the warriors subclass, which the warrior subclass or class group specifically says masters of combat who can deal and endure many wounds. So from what I'm reading here, I think they're going to retool the monk to either specialize in doing damage or tanking, which I'm not a fan of. We already have plenty of classes that can tank really well. Barbarians make great tanks. Fighters make great tanks. Paladins make great tanks. That is 25% of all the classes in the player's handbook already make really great tanks. However, there are no classes that work really well as controllers. Also, druids can make amazing tanks. Clerics can actually make really good tanks as well. So yeah, there's a lot of tanks that already exist. And dealing damage, literally every class can be built to deal damage for the most part. Like, you can even build a damage focused of a monk. It's just significantly harder. And you really, really have to understand the monk well, and choose the right subclass to make them a damage focus. Like, my Shadow Monk is not built for damage, but when I do things right, I can dish out a shit ton of damage. Yeah, a little bit upset about the fact that it seems like they're taking away my favorite aspect of the monk, which is they get to be that controller style play. They get to use that control play style, and it looks like they're going to simplify them down, because so many people went, well, the monk, he punched things, and he doesn't do enough damage because he doesn't punch the things right. It's not fair. I hate that so much. So anyway, I normally would be a big fan of the class groups coming back and the idea of roles coming back, because, again, I've talked about this many times before. Classes are all designed from their inception to fill a particular role. That's, again, I have a platinum best-selling class with, I think, now 5 different subclasses for it. I built that class to fill certain roles. And each subclass has a specific role it's designed to fill. Every single class that has ever been designed for D&D is designed to fit a certain place in the party. That's how it works. That's always how it has worked. So I like the idea of having an overarching term to go, well, these classes are going to generally tend to be really good at this particular thing. However, the class groups that they have here are not really based on kind of roles in the party. They're based on, hey, if you pick this class, you're going to get a single ability that really isn't expanded upon throughout the rest of the class. What I mean by that is something like, in current 5th edition, the Rogue's Cunning Action. It's a defining feature of the Rogue, and every single subclass gives you additional uses for your Cunning Action. Or the Bard's Inspiration mechanic. Every single Bard subclass gives you a different way to use your Bardic Inspiration. As you level up, your Bardic Inspiration can do more things. It can do and becomes more powerful. At least for the Bard, Rogue, and Ranger, expertise never gets any better. Mostly because you can't make expertise better. Expertise is really, really basic. If you have expertise in something, instead of adding your proficiency bonus to it, you add double your proficiency bonus. And that's it. And throughout all of this, the only thing that quote-unquote makes expertise better is somewhere later on the line, when they first get expertise, they get 2 things they're experts in. Later on, at a later level, somewhere in the class, they get 2 more. That's it. So basing an entire class group around the idea of, hey, you get this ability once, and then we give it to you again once. Out of 20 levels, 2 of them will have anything to do with the defining feature of your class group. I think that's really dumb. I like roles from 4th edition significantly better because, for example, both the Fighter and the Guardian are defenders. The Fighter, and all defenders had the ability to mark creatures. What marking was in 4th edition was you would do something to mark a creature, and then if that creature made an attack while it was marked that didn't include you, they had a -2 to their attack roll. It was a really, really simple mechanic. However, the way that marking worked was very, very different for both of those classes. For the Fighter, every time they made an attack, they could mark a creature. Every attack they made, as part of that attack, they would mark a creature. So a Fighter was built around the idea of, I just keep making attacks and keep marking creatures. The Guardian, on the other hand, as a minor action, effectively the equivalent of a bonus action in 5th edition, they could mark all creatures within 5 feet of them. So any creature that was basically next to them, they could mark as a minor action, and the mark would last until the end of their next turn. Whereas fighter marks, it's been a long time since I've built a 4th edition fighter. I believe fighter marks lasted until the creature died or until another mark superseded it. You also could only be marked by one creature at a time. So if someone else marked a creature, if you had multiple defenders, or they're actually, like the Artificer actually had a thing where they could summon a little robot to help them out in combat, and that robot could mark creatures. So, anyway, so it acted differently. And then as you gained levels, like Guardians would get abilities that would cause additional damage to marked creatures. Like they would use an encounter power and it'd say, by the way, all creatures that are marked by you within a certain distance take additional damage equal to this. And some of it became really powerful. One of their daily abilities was basically they would use this daily ability, they do a shit ton of damage, and then any creature that was marked by them would take a d6 of damage every time they attacked for the remainder of combat. So, again, they could technically mark up to 8 creatures per turn. If they were completely surrounded, they could mark 8 creatures per turn. And the mark lasted until the end of their next turn. So even if they couldn't group everybody in the same thing, as long as they were moving around, there was a good chance that they were doing damage to every single creature on the field every time they made an attack. That was really cool. And it meant that Guardians played significantly different than fighters. Guardians had this thing called primal forms that they could do, where they would literally put on, they were a primal, their power source was primal. So they were kind of like druids and things like that, where they used nature for their power. And they would transform into this primal version of them, and it would give them all these cool new abilities that they could use. And it was just a really, really cool thing. So again, roles like they had in 4th edition, I think are really helpful because they do give you some guidance as far as, hey, this is kind of what you could expect this class to do. Class groups is literally, hey, you get a single ability that's going to be the same as every other class in this class group, and the rest of that class is never going to touch it again. Nothing about the bard gives you extra things if you're with your expertise abilities or anything like that. Like any skills that you're an expert in, you can't use them in different ways. You can't use them with different action to the types. They now have specific actions that you use to use each different skill in combat that actually require your action. So yeah, I'm not a fan of at least what we've seen of the class groups, because again, they seem really half-assed. It's like, well, let's just give all of them expertise and then we'll call them experts. No, why does it matter that I'm a bard versus a ranger if we're both experts and we both have the exact same ability? No, I want a bard expert to play differently than a ranger expert based on their expertise. Again, they are experts. That is their big defining feature of the class. And all it means is, well, we can do ability checks a little bit better for 2 skills. And then at like level 15, we can do 2 more. It's dumb. And again, looking at mages, priests, and warriors, I'm even less thrilled with the idea. Like these class groups, for the most part, seem to just be ways to limit what feats they can use, which we'll talk about that in a second, which I think is dumb. Again, I'm not against. I really like class groups or roles or things like that where they kind of group. But I want the class group to be more than you get a single ability that is shared between these 3 classes, or 4 classes if you include the Artificer. That's dumb. And that also means people that are homebrewing classes for one D&D, which again, it's becoming more and more obvious that this is D&D 5.5. It's becoming more and more obvious that if you are going to homebrew a class, either you have to create a brand new class group, which means you need to make multiple classes for it to justify that, or you have to use, like if you want to make an expert, you have to give them expertise as one of their abilities, and that takes away some of the joy of creating new classes. Again, 4E rolls, yes, you had to have, for a defender, you had to have a marking ability, but every single defender had a different way to apply the mark and got different benefits from marking creatures. Sword Mage, one of my favorite defenders, they could mark at range. They could mark up to 25 feet away. As a minor action, you just go mark, and the way that Sword Mages were basically built was you would mark a creature far enough away from you that it couldn't attack you, and then anytime they made an attack that didn't include you that hit, because the mark would make it less likely to hit. If it did hit, you would have something interesting. My favorite one was, I think it was called the Avenging Sword Mage or the Chasing Sword Mage, something like that. Basically what would happen, if they hit, the Sword Mage would instantly teleport and make an attack against them as an immediate reaction. And so that was really, really fun. You would mark a couple different things. And the mark lasted, I think, until the end of the encounter. Again, it's been a while since I played a Sword Mage. So you would mark a couple different creatures, and then when it wasn't your turn, you would just kind of teleport, because there was no limitation on interrupt or reactions that you could take during a round. I think you could only, your only limitation was you could only do one of those per turn. Yeah, that really didn't come up because multi-attack wasn't really a thing for 4th edition, because abilities just got more powerful. You didn't need to make multiple attacks. Yeah, it was really, really fun. Another one you could do was, instead of you teleporting to them, you could literally just teleport them to you. Was the another flavor of Sword Mage. And so it was really, really cool. And so yes, it gave you kind of an ability you had to give a defender. It has to have a mark, but there were so many different ways to use a mark that it was really creative and interesting. Experts, you have to give them the expertise feat. Okay, well, what does that mean? Well, then they get 2 skills that they double their proficiency bonus on. Okay, but do they get a unique way to use it? No, they get bigger numbers. And that's the most important thing in the world, is numbers need to be big. Trust me on this. If there's bigger numbers, that means it's better just always. If I can give you a bigger number, then I have done something amazingly awesome, and you should thank me for big numbers. But what if I just want to do something interesting? Numbers are interesting because they're big. Small numbers aren't interesting. Everything that's big is interesting. I hate it. I absolutely hate it. So anyway, that was one of the big changes. They're bringing back class groups. Like I said, I'm going to do effectively deep dives of each class and subclasses. I don't think I'm going to need an entire, 45-minute video just for the classes, because they do make some changes, but they're not massive changes. So I'm probably going to talk about the subclass as well. The other big change is actually has to do with effectively Tier 4 play. Your subclass, at least from the ones that we've seen here, your subclass features look to be standardized, where you get your subclass at 3rd, and then 6th level, 10th level, 14th level, you get subclass features. And that's true for the Bard, that's true for the Ranger, and that's true for the Rogue. So currently in 5th edition, different classes get their subclass features at different levels. So some of them get them 6, 10, 14, 17 generally tends to be that pattern. Other ones get them at different things. So each class is a little bit different. This standardizes. 6th level is always a subclass feature. 10th level is always a subclass feature. 14th level is always a subclass feature. But what that does mean is your tier 4 characters do not get a subclass feature as part of tier 4. Once you hit level 14, you are not gaining any benefit from your subclass whatsoever. Now, in current D&D, if we look at the Rogue, for example, the Rogue gets their subclass in current 5th edition, gets their subclass at 3rd level. They get a new feature from their subclass at 9th level, then at 13th level, and then at 17th level. Something like a Paladin, they actually get a subclass feature at 20th level. Their ultimate ability of the class is based on their subclass, not the main class. So in D&D, how it has been in 5th edition thus far, your subclass got its most powerful ability somewhere in tier 4. And every tier you would get at least one ability for your subclass. Some of them got 2 per tier. Your tier 4 characters really could not give a flying fuck about what subclass they are. It's never getting any better after 14th level. A buddy of mine on Twitter actually posted retweeted a thread about why this is a bad idea, and I can't really argue with the person that said it. I'm going to see if I can find it real quick here, just because I hate stealing people's ideas without at least acknowledging that I got the idea from them, which I didn't 100% get the idea from them. So that's what it is. Ice Pickin', which is ice pick and then UN. Their actually display name is Rain Service, but the at Ice Pickin' talked about this thing about subclasses just ending in tier 3. WotC, Wizard of the Coast, has mentioned quite a few times most D&D is played in tier 1 and tier 2, so between levels of 1 and 10. A few games will get up to level 12, but most campaigns end between levels 10 and 12. So they tend to put their biggest emphasis on making sure tier 2, which is 5 to 10, is balanced and fun. That's where they do it, because that's where most of D&D is played. Getting from level 1 to 2 takes 1 session. Getting from level 2 to 3 takes 1 session. Getting from 3 to 4 generally takes 2 sessions. And then 4 to 5 might take 3 or 4 sessions. But you're talking about going from 1 to 5, effectively, if you play weekly, you can do that in a month and a half. And your average campaign is going to last anywhere from about 6 months to maybe a year and a half, depending on schedules and things like that. So the vast majority of your time is going to be spent between levels 5 and 10, because most people don't play high-level D&D. Because of that, they tend to kind of shit on the high-level stuff, because no one gets to play it unless you specifically start a campaign at a higher level. Or you're like me and you run campaigns that run for 4 or 5 years. By the way, Realms of the Wild 5-year anniversary is technically on Friday. But we don't play on Fridays, we play on Saturdays, so show up. Twitch.tv/Zelda Universe TV. So, anyway. Yeah, so now your subclass really stops giving you any benefit in tier 3. Near the end of tier 3, because tier 3 is levels 11 to 16. So level 14, that is the best your subclass is ever going to be. You can forget that you had that subclass after level 14. So it's one of the changes, and I with Ryan Service, I can't really argue with the guy. Like, he makes good points. It's dumb that you choose a subclass that's supposed to be something that really makes your character feel unique. But when you get to tier 4, you don't get anything that makes you better at being the subclass. It is just your main Kika class. The other thing that's changing is every class in 5th edition has an ultimate ability, basically. When you hit 20th level, you get something that's supposed to be really cool. Different classes have better ones than others. My personal favorites, the Paladins, get their ultimate ability from their subclass, and is generally what I call a transformation ability. For example, the Vengeance Paladin gets to turn into an Angel of Death. Literally, you sprout wings, you have this aura of fear that goes around you, you can do cool ass shit. It is a really cool, powerful ability that you get at 20th level. Well, what they've done with 1 to D&D is they have taken the 20th level abilities and they've shifted them to 18th level. So your most powerful ability for your class is now what you get at 18th level. And then at 19th level, like it is in 5th edition, you get a feat. And then at 20th level, you get what's called an epic boon. If you've never heard of an epic boon, they actually exist in 5th edition already. In the Dungeon Master's Guide, they are specifically mentioned in the kind of customizing your game section. And they're meant to be rewards outside of leveling that you can give to players. So if your players reach level 20, when they gain enough experience to gain a level, well, there isn't a level 21 in D&D 5th edition. So one of the suggestions that they make is give them an epic boon, which are kind of just generic boosts to certain things. They're cool. They tend to be less powerful than ultimate abilities from classes and stuff like that. But because they are just epic boons, they're not limited to a specific class. You can take the one that you want. So you trade a little bit of power for versatility, whereas anyone can take them. And they are kind of cool. They also mention you can use epic boons when you're running that campaign. If the players do something really, like one of the players does something really, really unique and interesting, you want to reward them with something special, you could give them an epic boon when they're not level 20. Just understand epic boons are kind of balanced around level 20 play. So if you're giving one, you need to be certain that you want to give them something really, really nice. So that's how epic boons were in 5th edition. They were just designed to be kind of extras. Not how they are in here. Now, 20th level, every class gets to take an epic boon. And they list some epic boons here. And the epic boons, your mileage may vary. Some of them seem really, really cool. Some of them seem kind of pointless. Like I believe one of the epic boons is you just get proficiency in some more skills. So for a 20th level character to just get some extra proficiencies is kind of dumb. I'm going to see if I can find the epic boon thing. Yeah. Epic boon of skill proficiency. You gain proficiency in all skills. I mean, it's kind of cool. You're now proficient in everything. But it's kind of dumb, in my personal opinion. And then there's other things like epic boon of speed. Your speed increases by 30 feet. It's kind of cool. And then things like epic boon of recovery. You can use a bonus action to regain a number of hit points equal to half your hit point maximum. But only once per day. And then in addition, you succeed on every death saving throw that isn't a 1. So, I mean, there's kind of interesting things. But for a 20th level ability, epic boons just don't feel good. Like, if you reach 20th level in a class, you should get the most powerful version of that class. And now they're shifting that to 18th level. And I think part of that has to do with multiclassing in D&D 5th edition is not really as useful as it was. Like in 3rd edition, you were required to multiclass. After, I believe, depending on the base class, after about either level 9 or 13, somewhere in there, anywhere between 9, 10, 11, 12, or 13, you just stop gaining features for the class, and the only benefits you get is your basic attack bonus goes up or your basic spellcasting bonus, things like that. So your stats go up, but you stop getting features for it. So 3rd edition, you are effectively required to multiclass. And that's why they had their advanced classes, which I can't remember what they were called in 3rd edition. what were they called? Prestige classes. That's what they were called. Okay. So yeah, in third edition, they actually introduced these things called prestige classes, which required you to have a certain basic attack bonus or certain skills at certain levels, things like that. So you literally could not start as a prestige class. You had to start, and quite a few of them required you to multi-class and other things, like the Bladesinger prestige class required not only being able to cast spells of a certain level, but you also had to have a basic attack bonus of a certain thing, and wizards and most spellcasters didn't get basic attack bonuses, so you generally had to multi-class into some kind of martial class to get your basic attack bonuses up. And then you would also need things like weapon finesse. You need certain feats to become a Bladesinger. So yeah, in third edition, multi-classing was really, really useful. Second edition, multi-classing was a weird thing where it was, if you were a non-human race, it was chosen at first level, and then if you were a human, you could do what's called dual classing, and there was technically no limitation to how many different classes you could dual class into, and it was real weird. But it was a cool system. And then multi-classing in first edition was just complicated, to say the least. Fourth edition had its used feats to multi-class, and then they had this thing called hybrid classing, which was another really interesting thing. But fifth edition, multi-classing just really isn't that useful. Generally, the only time taking more than maybe 1 or 2 levels in a class is beneficial is between levels of 5 and roughly 8. It's not even the full tier 2. That's when they tend to shine, because you start kind of mixing things up, and none of the classes get really powerful abilities until around level 11. Once you hit level 11 in a class, you start getting really powerful abilities, and anyone that has more than maybe a 1 or 2 level dip in a class starts feeling massively underpowered. And by the time you get to tier 4, if you have 4 levels of rogue and maybe 6 levels of fighter, and then maybe another 7 levels of ranger or something. You try to do some stuff. You are massively underpowered compared to your allies because you've never gotten a level 11 ability. And level 11 is when they start getting really powerful. And especially once you get to tier 4, the abilities that you get in tier 4 are really, really good. However, depending on the class, your capstone abilities just aren't that useful. For some of them. Some of them are really, really useful. Like, druids get the ability to wild shape as many times as they want. They remove their limitation to wild shape. If you are a moon druid, that makes you almost unkillable. If you are a circle of the land druid, it's really not that useful because you're casting spells and you can't cast spells in wild shape. You can only do that as a moon druid. Depending on your class, it's not a bad idea to sacrifice your ultimate ability to get, take a class in fighter and get a bunch of armor and weapon proficiencies. Or take a class in rogue and get sneak attack. Or take two classes. This is a really, really common one. Take two levels in warlock. And you get their pact magic, which can be remarkably useful. Because there's spell slots that, even though at second level you're only going to have first level spell slots, there's still spell slots that come back on a short rest. So they can be really, really useful. And then you can pick a couple Eldritch Invocations, or taking 2 levels of Sorcerer to get some sorcery points. Things like that. Those actually tend to be the most beneficial ways to multi-class a characters. Take a 1 or 2 level dip into another class, but stay mostly in your main class. That works really well. With this new change, it actually kind of encourages you to take 1 or 2 level dips, because again, epic boons are not really that epic. And the only other thing that you're going to miss out on is a single feat or ability score improvement, which, if you've built your character up well, you're not going to miss a single feat or ability score improvement that much. compared to the benefits that you can get from getting something like Second Wind and Action Surge if you go some fighter levels, things like that. So to me, it seems like they're trying to find a way to make multi-classing slightly more viable, because again, the 18th level abilities still are not amazing for some of. Again, we only have 3 here, so I can't tell you 100%. So they're making it so multi-classing is not nearly as much of a detriment at higher levels, which I guess is okay. Again, I've never, with all the different subclasses that exist, there, like, if you wanted to be a fighter wizard, which is a really, really common multi-class all the way since original D&D, the elf class, back when elves were a class, not a race, the elf class was a fighter wizard. You had swords and things like that you can use, but you also could cast spells. You weren't as good a spellcaster as a wizard, but you were that hybrid class. When you got to advanced first edition and second edition, fighter mage or fighter wizard was a selectable class that you could do. Nowadays in 5th edition, if you want to be a fighter wizard, you can by just going Eldritch Knight, or by going Bladesinger Wizard, or War Magic Wizard. Like, the subclasses really tend to take the place of multi-classing, and there are enough subclasses that there are really very few situations where, if I was trying to build kind of a weird custom character, like I had a series for a while called Play Your Faves, where people would just tell me, hey, can you make this into a D&D character? And I would do it. Like, I think the last one I did was the Green Mighty Morphin Power Ranger. I turned them into a D&D class. So that you can play them and you can basically do what they could do on television in D&D. And a lot of times, there really wasn't too many times where I ever had to do maybe a 1 or 2 level dip into a different class. Generally, a subclass would be enough for me. And it's one of the things I like about D&D 5th edition is your subclass in 5th edition mattered. Your subclass would pretty drastically change how you play your character. It was kind of the equivalent of multiclassing. And you saw that in the kinds of subclasses that existed. You had things like the Battlemaster Fighter was designed to be a little bit more of a controller style fighter, whereas the Eldritch Knight was designed to be a magic fighter. Or if you look at, like, the Assassin Rogue was meant to really, really specialize in just killing people, whereas the Rogue Thief was designed to let you really kind of play out that fantasy of the more Bilbo Baggins style. You can get in and out of places really easily. You're really good at thieving. The second level story work thing basically gave you the ability to climb and all this stuff. Like, it was a really cool subclasses where if you went the... I think it was the Inquisitive Rogue. I have rogues up here. I'll just look at the subclasses. The Mastermind Rogue. The Mastermind Rogue really kind of was a Bard Rogue hybrid, where it was much more about words and kind of manipulation, which is something that Bards do very, very well. Or the Arcane Trickster was your Wizard Rogue. Or the Swashbuckler was a little bit more like a Fighter Rogue. That's what they were designed for. And it seems like they're not really changing that much, other than your subclasses are going to be less impactful. Because again, you don't get as many subclass features and they end at 14th level. So yeah, like I said, I'm not a huge fan of the Epic Boon. As I mentioned before, Ryan Service has a really nice little short thread. I'll see if I can't link it and put it in the description below for you to read about that. I think he's a little bit catastrophizing it just a little bit, because he says things like, there are 2 very concerning elements. Not really. You want to know why they're not that concerning? Because if you go down to the rules and you look at the rules for critical hits for this playtest packet, they go, we're using the critical hit rules from the player's handbook. All the people that were freaking out about how critical hits are, now that critical hits are auto successes on skill checks, guess what? Critical hits were reset. They threw it out in one playtest. So anyone going, this is very, very work. No, it's not. They're trying something different, and I think it's a dumb thing for them to try. They're trying to add, again, they're trying to effectively make your 20th level ability a little bit more versatile, but it's a 20th level ability. It's hard enough to play a character long enough to get them to 20th level. You want to feel rewarded for it. You don't want to be, okay, well, here's a list of different things. You don't want to, go up to the teacher's desk where she opens it up and goes, well, you did really well today, so pick your prize. Here's a little gummy ring, or you can have some Smarties. They don't want that. They want something specific to the class that they've spent years playing to get to that point. So yeah. As far as the other kind of major changes, like I said, I'll be doing a video on each one of the classes themselves to kind of talk about what they do. There are some changes I like. There are some changes I don't like. We do have full spell lists now for the arcane, divine, and primal spells. And one thing I did find interesting, I mentioned before how spell lists used to be a way to limit classes, and now by making arcane, it means they get access to they don't. The Bard, for example, takes spells from the arcane spell list, but they can only prepare spells from let me see. They can only prepare spells from the divination, enchantment, illusion, or transmutation schools of magic. So in current 5th edition, the School of Magic really only matters to wizards that specialize in a specific school of magic. Nobody else cares about the schools of magic. Now, it seems like 1D&D is going to make the schools of magic significantly more important because it looks like they're going to limit your spell list based on schools of magic, which I think I like less than just tailoring the spell list to per class. Just because, like, again, bards cannot use evocation magic. Well, they can, but we'll talk about that with the bard, because they still get to do the weird bard shit where they learn stuff they're not supposed to. 'Cause bard. But that means their spellcasting in general. They also can't learn conjuration magic. So their spellcasting in general. Divination is mostly kind of role-playing kind of stuff. Enchantment can have a decent number of uses, but a lot of charm spells in that. Illusion can do damage every so often, but tends to be a little more role-playing. And then transmutation, again, tends to be a little bit more utility than anything else. So bards in current 5th edition can be really powerful spellcasters. You do some crazy damage if you build them the right way. And now they are really being shoehorned specifically into much more support, and they're having specific aspects put in to make them healers, which I find really, really interesting because most 5th edition Bard players don't play them as healers. So yeah, I find that interesting. It's cool to see what the new spell lists look like, but that is literally all they are. Is they name the spell. And they say arcane, and then they just name all the spells by level. So it's, I believe, one spell, they actually have a new version of it. Barkskin, they have a new version. But everything else, it's just the same spells you had before. We just know what list they fit on now. So that's interesting. They have a bunch more feats in here. Ability score improvements is now a feat that you can take repeatedly. At 4th level, you now just get a feat, and one of the feats you can choose is ability score improvement. So yeah, that's kind of interesting. But overall, I think there's some interesting stuff. Well, let's do this the official way. Final thoughts. Overall, I think there's some interesting stuff in here. It's nice to see what the full spell lists might look like. Again, this may or may not change. But it's nice to see what the full spell lists are starting to look like, which is cool. And a few of the feats I like. I think they're interesting. A few of them I don't like. I think they're dumb. And again, probably the biggest thing we've seen of them taking what the audience said, or what their customers say into training, is they scrapped, at least for this playtest package, they scrapped the new critical hit rules. Now, they've worded other things so that critical hits are still not going to work the exact same way that they do in 5th edition as they are right now. From what I'm reading, they have worded the rogue sneak attack so that it will not double damage on a critical hit. So they are still making changes. They are still nerfing things that seem to be a little bit overpowered. I'm not sure how much I like that yet, but I think this gives some interesting ideas. I like the fact that they have now kind of standardized the things like information checks is what I call them, but basically like insight checks or arcana checks in the middle of combat. There's an actual action you take to do those. So now instead of like the DM having to go, well, do I think that was really worth your action or should that be a bonus action? No, there's actual rules for it. And that also means that certain classes, and we see it in here, there are certain classes, certain feats that allow you to make these actions as bonus actions. So it does allow for a little bit more kind of rewarding players for specializing in certain things. And then I'm actually okay with. I think that's a good thing. So overall, it's interesting. Like I said, I'll be making at least 4 different videos, probably 5, because I'll do one on the rules that change. I'll do one on the feats, and then one each for each of the 3 classes that are in here. So there's more stuff about this is going to be going on, but for the most part, I think there are some steps in the right direction. There's some changes to the Ranger that I love, and then I think there are some steps that it seems like Wizard of the Coast just doesn't understand. Wizard of the Coast has lessons that they are just unwilling to learn. So we'll see. Anyway, that is going to be all for me today. As always, remember to like the video, subscribe to the channel, hit the bell icon, turn notifications on, all those things super important in the comments down below. What do you think is the most surprising thing that you've heard about this, whether you've read it or not? Do you think the bringing back of kind of class groups is a good thing or is a bad thing? Do you think it would be better if they started doing a little bit more like the 4th edition roles? Do you like the class groups as they are now? Do you like the Epic Boon thing? Do you hate the Epic Boon thing? What is the thing that you were most interested or excited about that has changed in this playtest packet? Let me know in the comments down below. Otherwise, again, that is all for me today, and I'll see you guys next time. All right? Bye-bye.